Jason, welcome back to This is Horror.
It's strange because in some ways it feels like I was just on the show and feels like I'm on it all the time. But I know that in reality it's been a year. But basically, everything that's happened during the pandemic era, which is still, I say still the pandemic era just because it's still that period of time where everything blurs together. And movies that I thought came out 6 months ago actually came out 4 years ago, and vice versa. So it is good to be back. It's to, I guess, to the listeners, it's been a long time, but it feels familiar to me.
Yeah. Well, as you say, it's been about a year. So, I mean, given what you said about time, this might be difficult to answer, but I do always like to start to find out what have been some of the biggest changes for you, both personally and professionally, in that time.
So the last 9 months has been promoting this book that I'm here to talk about, which is a standalone novel that is a big departure for me because it's not part of any of the series I write, that including the one that like made me famous, and it's not even in the genres I write. It's this ticking clock thriller. So trying to kind of uh, convince people that it's worth reading or whatever. And these days, with my primary world being TikTok, it has been teaching myself how to translate 140,000 word novel to person who only likes to watch videos on TikTok and convincing them that if you enjoy watching me, you may enjoy reading this book. But it's gone very well. But I have had to continue my transition into becoming an almost entirely video being, where I exist, and when I'm not on camera, I might as well just dissolve because that's now where my audience is. It's very strange.
Yeah, and I recall the last time we were speaking, you were talking about how a significant proportion of your income is now from TikTok. And so I guess that also can probably create some fear for you when you see people in America talking about the possibility of banning TikTok. And I mean, do you have things in place if that happens? And what do you think
Yeah.
the likelihood is?
Well, see, that's the thing. I've been in this game. What they My least favorite word is the content creation game. That I hate using that term. But I've been in this game since the late 90s for more than 25 years. So I have watched one platform after another, one seemingly invincible platform after another turn out to be a sandcastle under the tide. So I was here for, I got my start in the blogging era. And it's like, oh, this is great. It's long form articles and it's just text. You don't have to worry about what you look like or anything like that. You don't have to be handsome or charismatic. It's just the words. And then I watched that go away and be replaced with the social media era, and then to the photo era, the Instagram era, and then now to the video era and the podcast era, and had to like learn how to talk into a microphone because podcasts are where suddenly all of my publicity is being done. And now 40% of my book sales are audiobook because it's just like another podcast. So I've watched one era come and go. So having a platform disappear always sucks very much, including when the full time job I had for 13 years kind of collapsed and went away at crack.com, where again, as the website era kind of went away. So it would just be more of the same. At this point in my life, I've kind of accepted that when you work in media, you're just being tossed around by the tides, and I've got accounts already set up on Facebook and Instagram. Facebook is growing faster than TikTok for me, even though you'd think of that as just being an old folks' home for the paranoid. But nope, lots of people still on there. So TikTok or Instagram has turned itself into a video app, just like TikTok, trying to get that TikTok traffic. If TikTok is in fact banned, I expect a lot of that audience will just wash straight over to Instagram. But if not, they'll invent some new thing and it'll have a stupid name, and I will create an account the first day I learn about it. and I will try to make that work too. And then 10 years from now, if I'm still coming on and doing this show in the year 2035, I'll be complaining in the exact same way. It's like this VR platform where I'm on, this 3D VR Neuralink thing that I'm on, they're shutting it down. And I got to go to this fourth dimensional whatever thing they've invented, this AI thing, and have to create an AI avatar for myself or whatever godforsaken thing they'll have in the future.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting too that your Facebook is now growing more than your TikTok, because I think for what, almost a decade, people have felt like, oh, Facebook is on its way out, but it is seemingly the one social network that can't be killed. Just as you think it's down, it's back again.
Do either of you use Facebook still?
I I came off Facebook a few years ago, but I'm starting to wonder if I should return to it because, as I say, it seems indestructible. I don't
My
want to personally, but if it's a good business move, then I'll consider it.
my
Bob, are you
Facebook,
big into Facebook?
yeah, my Facebook is set to self-destruct on September 29th. It is no longer deactivated. It is in deletion mode. Now, that said, that also gives me an opportunity to come back to Facebook and build from the ground up if I need to. I will not like that because I think the last time we talked, I was leaving Twitter. I have returned to Twitter, and I have felt that even though the Twitter actually works for me now compared to previously when I couldn't, I basically was unusable on any media form, could not use it anywhere. They had done something to my account. uh, I have kept my mouth shut about the muskrat, and so I haven't really said anything. And I have, it works better. I lost thousands, and so I'm just trying to rebuild.
It's very strange because when all of the Twitter alternatives popped up, because we all thought it was going to die within a few months of Elon Musk owning it, I started immediately, grabbed an account on Threads, grabbed an account on Blue Sky, grabbed an account on Mastodon that I never figured out how to log into. And it's still, everybody's still just on Twitter. I've watched those alternatives. They've got some people on them. There's not a lot of activity. Threads, which is the Instagram spinoff from Meta, it's the same crap you expect based on Instagram and Facebook, and it's a lot of just engagement farming. It is extremely difficult to find the good stuff on that family of platforms. The short form
Mm-hmm.
Twitter clones and Twitter itself, which is now basically a clone of what it was. But still, that's where all the journalists still are. When Joe Biden dropped out of the race, he announced it on Twitter. Like that was the first place the story broke, and that still happens like that. It's
Mm-hmm.
very weird. You can't predict what's going to stick around or not. I guess the whole deal with Facebook and Meta is they've just got so much money that they can just keep acquiring companies and keep expanding and keep pouring, because they tried to create that virtual reality world that I think they've probably already shut down by now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even, I haven't heard anything about that in years. I don't even know if it's still there, but yeah, it's a cesspool kind of, mainly because you're on there because there's specific things you want to see and people you want to keep in contact with, and the platform just fights you every step of the way.
Yeah, and everything that we're talking about here, I mean, I think it is incredibly relevant to the new novel. I'm starting to worry about this black box of doom. But something you said before was, of course, this is a standalone. And up until this point, you have been known for your series, particularly John Dies at the End and Zoe Ash. What was the impetus, or why did you decide, after building this massive platform for both series, to release a standalone?
I just get bored very easily because I will make it very clear this is bad business for an author. For one thing, generally, the best thing you can do is have a very specific genre that you stick to. And that, for example, if you're a romance author, there's an entire business infrastructure of romance author romance book reviewers and book talk accounts and bookscreen, but they only review romance. So when you make your name in that genre, you have a group of people who will talk about your book, the next one that comes out. And same thing with the readers. So if there are people who only read romance, or people that only read horror, only read whatever. So doing a horror series and then telling the publisher, okay, I actually want to do this science fiction series that has no horror elements in it. And then for this next book deal, got them to agree to, the book deal was basically 3 books. The next John Dice the End book, the next Zoe book, and I wanted to do this standalone, just a ticking clock thriller and a dark satire. And they said yes. And I kind of bundled it with the stuff they knew was going to sell. And we'll probably do the same thing with this next book deal. Like, promise to keep the series going, but have some standalone thing, because I just don't want to get kind of roped into writing the same thing all the time. I think George R. R. Martin has come to hate his job because he wants to do anything but write Game of Thrones books. He clearly, I don't know if you've followed his whole situation, but has become very miserable. The fact that all fans want is the next A Song of Ice and Fire novel, and he has all these other things he wants to do, all these TV projects, all these other books he wants to write. It's like, yeah, you're a creative person. If you've gotten bored with your own thing, and that's all the fans want from you, it can take you to a better place. So I've just tried to never train the reader that I can only produce one thing. Otherwise, they get to think of you as like a faucet, where it's like, I want more of this specific thing. I'm going to turn the knob and it's going to come out of you. It's like, no, it's art shouldn't be like that. A creator should, should be free to pursue some weird or maybe even stupid idea. But people have been extremely kind and very receptive to it so far. The pre-sales of this book have been very, very good for something that people don't know what to expect, because there's no built-in fan base. So they are trusting me to an extent.
Yeah, and thematically, I mean, it's concerned with commentating on technology and social media and kind of the isolation in which we can find ourselves experiencing as a result of it. But I suppose, as we've only said so far, that this is a ticking clock thriller, could you give our listeners kind of the elevator pitch just so they know what they're getting in for?
Sure. So the setup is, there's a young guy who's driving for a rideshare service, and he meets a strange woman who offers him $200,000 to drive her across the country from outside LA to Washington, D.C., but it's off the books. She has with her this large black box, like big enough that a person could crawl inside of it. She's like, I've got to have this box to Washington, D.C. in a few days, but if we do this, you cannot look inside the box. You can't even ask me what's in the box. You have to leave behind any devices that can be tracked. So no phone, no GPS, no laptop, nothing like that. You cannot tell anyone you're doing this. You have to just disappear with me, and we have to leave now. You don't have any time to think about it. This is urgent. So he agrees, but then some people on the internet and some other parties get wind of this trip, that there's this mysterious woman with a mysterious box traveling, and they have decided, based on some other clues they've pieced together, that this is a precursor to something terrible. They speculate it may be part of a terrorist attack, because they are heading toward the Capitol. So it creates this very tense and sometimes extremely stupid situation where a bunch of strangers communicating on social media are trying to coordinate a way to stop this from happening. But in order to do that, they have to filter through this social media ecosystem where truth really cannot survive in that environment. So it's like, can they arrive at what's actually going on? Can they arrive at the truth in time? And that goes about as badly as you would expect. It's spoiler alert. It is, I don't think it's a spoiler to let people know it goes very badly.
Yeah, and I think I must have said before, but I naively thought when we got the internet and we got access to more information, I thought, right, there'll just be more objective truth out there. But the more information we have, the more it seems impossible to actually discern what is true and what isn't. And now with the rise of AI, it's like, well, you can do the deep fake. You can even provide video evidence that is not of this reality.
So how old are you guys? Because I'm 49. How old are you?
So I'm 38 and Bob.
I'm 57.
See, this is fascinating to me because every show I go on, I ask about this because we all had the internet come along at different parts of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're young enough that you can't have remembered very much of your life without the internet, right? You would have gotten it when you were like 10 years old, something like
Yeah,
that.
about 10, yeah.
So I happen to be in a position where I got it in college. So I was to some degree a fully formed adult already when I first was exposed to, in my experience, it was these old IRC chat rooms. And there's a lot of, I was mostly going to chat rooms for like Chicago sports and things like that. And we were just making horrible jokes at each other. But it is fascinating to talk to younger, like podcasters, whatever, people in their late 20s who have never known a life without the internet because they were a toddler before it came around. And then I know there's some people probably listening to this and definitely people who watch my TikToks who can't fathom a world without the internet. Like they can't conceive of it. They can't even picture what it would be, what it would look like. I just find that extremely interesting. Because it wasn't in my formative years, but I definitely became, because again, for people who don't know me, my career was made on the internet. The first book that made me famous, whatever, was written as a series of blog posts back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then that got turned into a film and I got a book deal out of it at a time when bloggers were not getting book deals. This was a new phenomenon. It was one of the first like internet sensations that made its way into, mainstream Hollywood film, hardcover release by Macmillan. Now that happens all the time. Now everyone, if you have a blog and you don't have a book deal, then you must be lazy or something. Just joking, of course. But so, like, do you remember when you first got online? Like, either one of you, do you remember the first time you got on and thought, were you both like, wow, this is fantastic, it's gonna change my life?
I do. Um, I had a little bit of experience with it at work because I was selling cars, and they wanted to use the internet to sell cars to be able to be able to give people quotes. And so I got a crash course from someone much younger than me and how to set up an email. And this is back when now we have websites, but this is back when we had a web page. So a web page was basically your splash page and everything about you with an email link to where you could click on the email link and it would send, if you had your email set up, it would send an email. So you could send an email to this company. And so that was like my first experience with the internet was, and all I wanted was I want that email to go to my email, so I can get all the sales. And they're like, well, no, it goes to me and I divvy them out. And then I got the internet at home, which we had to wire into, this before Wi-Fi. And of course I had some friends over and, of course we're, I'm still young. I'm still, I'm under 30 years old. A bunch of guys over drinking beer, finally got the internet hooked up on my laptop. And so the first thing, we pull up a browser, Alta Vista, and I'm like, so what do I do now? And my buddy, he goes, well, I know what to do. He types in www.porn.com. And all I know is that 50,000 little windows popped up all over my computer. And I said, that's a lot of porn that I'm not going to pay for. And we spent the next 30 minutes closing out every browser tab because that's how stupid we were. So that was my first experience with the internet.
But that's the way that people used to browse, by guessing a domain, because back then you could type in www. I don't know, Disney.com. And it was just some guy's webpage because the companies weren't on there yet. They didn't know what it was.
Right. Yeah.
Corporations were really late to get to this. People don't remember. So you could easily go to, I don't know, Coca-Cola.com, and it would also be a porn site that run by some 19-year-old kid
Yeah.
in Ukraine, like whatever, running out of his bedroom. No, it was the Wild West. But my experience in terms of the first content I saw online, extremely similar to your first in terms of, wait a second, I wonder if there's nobody policing what gets posted on here. I wonder if and yeah, found out yes, the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm. I remember at a writers conference prior to that I was talking to an editor who worked for, I can't remember, it was one of the big five. The guy next to him handled Tom Clancy's books, and we were talking about how, the future. And this guy, he's probably not in publishing anymore, because he says there will never, ever, ever be a time when a writer will email his book to a publisher. That will never happen, because we need the hard copy to be able to edit it. And he says, he goes, the guy next to me in my building edits Tom Clancy books. He has to wheel these manuscripts around in a wheelbarrow. And I'm like, but if you emailed it, you could just read it from the computer, right? And you wouldn't have to worry about all that paper. And he's like, it'll never happen. It's never, you can mark my words, it'll never happen. And so I've been snail mailing my manuscripts ever since, because he said it would never happen.
as recently as 2013, my publisher was still editing on a hard copy. They would FedEx me with somebody taking the little red pencil and done all their markings, and then it was my job to manually mark, either keep the change or no, keep it the way it is. And I kept thinking, because it's like, what if FedEx loses that package? Do you just have to start over again? Because I don't think they photocopied this. And it's the same thing. Like, my change is sending it back. It's like, man, if this gets ground up in a mail sorting machine or gets routed to the wrong building, we've got to start all over, because it took months for them to do those edits. But that was extremely recent. That was only a decade ago. And I remember them asking me with the next book, like, hey, we're migrating over to digital. We know a lot of authors are not a fan of this. Would it be okay if we sent this to you as a Word doc where you can click the changes? It's like, yes, I am okay with that. Yes, thank you. I literally have not worked in hard copies of any kind. Yes, thank you. So yeah, the publishing industry was very late to come around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when we talk about technology and being late to come around, when I first came to Japan in 2014, I was amazed that they were predominantly still using fax machines to communicate.
I've heard that.
And
I've heard somebody tell me that they came there and found that their ATMs had hours, that their ATM machines would close. It's like, oh, it's 5 p.m. The ATM's closed. It's like, what? Like, yeah, they said Japan is it's very, in some ways it's decades ahead. In some ways it's incredibly old fashioned. They said there's tons of businesses that still are like all cash or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so paradoxical. I mean, because even now, most businesses have a fax machine. And, recently some cutting edge young politicians have said, hey, maybe we could phase out the fax machine. And, I tell people at my workplace, it's like, look, the fax machine was last popular in the UK in the 80s before I was born. And they think I'm joking. I'm like, no, or exaggerating. It's like, that's literally the reality. So, I mean, it's only been this year that my day job workplace, because we send a timesheet every month, they've now said, oh, instead of faxing, if you want, you could email it. It's like, yes, yeah, of course I want that. But there's certain expenses where they're like, no, you can't email that. You've got to send that through the post. That's the way we do that. Like, and ones that don't even have a receipt. So it's like, so why? Why you're getting the same information? But yeah, slowly but surely, Japan is catching up. And then on the other hand, we have the bullet train, one of the fastest
Mhm.
trains in the world. We've got Sony, we've got so many technological advancements. And sometimes I feel like, it's a two-tier system. There's some parts that are so technologically advanced, and then others where they're kind of caught in, I suppose, decades previous. And I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that there's such an aging population as well. Because I know in the UK, if you want a doctor's appointment, it's pretty difficult to get it if you don't have the internet. And I know that because my grandfather, who is 93 and still going, he like finds it really difficult because he's refused to get the internet, and now in 2024 that is causing quite a lot of problems for his life. So my parents will have to do things kind of for him, and they don't live close to each other. He contacts them on his landline. That's the only way that you can reach him.
And this is relevant to the book, by the way, if people think we've gotten so far
Yeah.
off topic, because
No, no, no.
this story is very much informed by the fact that the two main characters, the two people taking this trip, are in their mid to late 20s. So they are people who are in their era where they can't imagine a world without these devices. So the idea, for example, she tells him, you have to leave your smartphone behind, implying we are being tracked, that I'm not going to let that device give away our location. He almost sees that as a deal breaker because he's like, how would you travel across the country without a smartphone? Without the ability, how would you do it with that GPS? It's like, well, you will use a map. It's like, well, yeah, but how do you find out where restaurants are? How do you do any of this? It's like, well, no, you do it the way people did it in the past. You see the signs on the highway, and we'll pay with cash. And it's like, well, will hotels even let you stay there these days without a card? Like, can you just pull out a wad of cash at a Holiday Inn and stay there? Because it seems like they always want a credit card, and they want to be able to bill room expenses to the card instead of having to hit you up for you to pull cash out of your wallet. It's like, could you actually get across the country without a credit card, without any transaction, any electronic transaction or anything like that? I couldn't do it. And I'm, in theory, I was an adult before the first time I logged on, but uh, I live in a city for the first time in my life. I grew up in a very, very small town, now live in a large city. I could not navigate this city without GPS. It's too many streets. It's too, the way it's set up is too confusing. But of course, that obviously was the way people functioned for all of civilization until, you know, whatever, 15 years ago when everybody started getting iPhones. But it's so strange because there's such a dividing line between the world before and after that device came about, because that was as big of a change as going from no internet to the internet, going from internet is on a computer like Bob, or the in your house where you had a computer that you went to that had the pornography or whatever on it, to now it's in your pocket and on your person at all times, and where every question you could possibly have can be answered with your phone. And when you go to a restaurant, a lot of times they do not have a menu. They've got a little code on the table and you scan that. And it just assumes, one, that you have a smartphone, two, that you know how to use it, and three, that you're fine with this being your entire life, that everything happens through this screen.
Mm-hmm. I work in the tech industry, and I sell cell phones, and I sell cell phone service. But I also am old enough to know that we don't need none of this stuff. Okay,
You can get by with it.
we have survived for thousands of years without it. And so why are we so dependent on it? It's because we've been tricked into thinking that we need it when we really don't. need it. Now I'm shooting myself in the foot. If somebody's thinking about coming get service with me, they're probably not going to do it now. And I don't care because it's the truth and you probably need to hear it. We don't need this stuff. And they pay me stupid money to sell you something you don't need.
But one of the most common questions you'll see anywhere on social media, on Reddit, anywhere from young men, it's like, well, I've tried online dating and it doesn't work. So how are you supposed to meet people? It's like, well, how did people meet each other before? Because they can't conceive of, well, isn't this how you do it? You set up a Tinder profile and then you get rejected 5,000 times and you eventually stumble across the one real actual woman on the platform. It's not just a bot or like an OnlyFans account. And it's like, so how do you meet people? Asking this basic question, and you have seen people reply like, well, it's good to have some sort of a hobby where you leave the house and go interact with people, or if you go out in public to places, and where you can encounter other humans. That's how people do it. People in the past used to meet each other at church or in bars or whatever, at the workplace, although I would assume most workplaces would prefer you not try to do that now. But I find that fascinating. Like the basic function of pair bonding, where couples meet each other, has been turned into like a corporate smartphone technology that doesn't work. It doesn't, because, by the way, if Tinder gets you matched to someone and you marry them, you're obviously not going to use Tinder anymore, hopefully. So they've lost a customer. So the thing that makes them the maximum money in the engagement is if you never meet someone permanently, if you just cycle through a bunch of hookups. And guess what? That's what it does, because they would lose money if they actually solved your problem and solved your loneliness. So that to me is like the most fundamental example of, well, how do you do this without using the smartphone? It's like, these things did not exist as recently as 2008. And people, you actually met each other more frequently back then without the technology.
No, it's crazy because I mean, it's like when a kid, I don't have children, but if my child or if my teenage or 20-year-old son or daughter came out, how do I meet somebody outside of online? I'd be like, I'm old enough to be like, well, I met your mom because she was trying on a pair of shoes at a store and I was getting some shoes and I told her I didn't like the way those shoes looked on her feet. And she got kind of pissed off at me and we started talking. And next thing you know, we had some things in common. And then later on that evening, I seen her at another store and I was like, you're following me. So she gave me her number and that's how we actually met. And then be like, yeah, you met in person? Well, of course. Yes, we met in person. I've tried internet dating and you're right. It doesn't work. It's like you spend all this time chatting with someone and you don't know what they're telling you is true or not. You've built up this avatar of yourself, it's
It
never gone
seems
anywhere.
dehumanizing. I was lucky enough, again, that I met my wife before either of us had email addresses, and so I predated all of this. But no, and again, I don't know if Michael, if you've had great experiences with it. I hope we're not denigrating it too much.
I have actually, but
well, good.
I didn't want to.
There's a celebration there.
I didn't want to derail, but I sometimes think that my success with internet dating, if we're going to term it that kind of universally, is because so many other people are not good at using it. So I feel if you can just have a basic conversation with someone that's a little bit more involved in what you up to, then you're instantly in the kind of top percentage. So I think it might be a user error sometimes. That, and as you correctly said, that there are a number of bots that you have to watch out for, so you have to be discerning about that. But yeah, I think generally my personality and the way that I am is very like, you're either going to probably like me quickly or not like me, because it's quite it's quite intense. I don't play internet dating in a kind of regular way. I will cut to some philosophical I will cut to some philosophical questions, maybe a little bit like how I am in the podcast. I mean, I don't open with what are your early life lessons, but I tried to be efficient with it, and so it worked out okay for me. Not using it at the moment as I am married, but when I wasn't, it worked out well.
I think that because of internet dating and society has changed, but I think that humans have lost, younger generations have lost this thing called flirting. I think flirting is kind of by the wayside, and I don't know. I grew up in an era where you had to flirt if you wanted to meet. For me to meet women, I had to flirt, and I would be, if the internet suddenly died, we'd have just a bunch of people who they'd be going to older people. How do you, what's this thing called flirting? No, it's flirting. I looked it up in a book because that's all that's left. How do you do it? And it's like, well,
Because it is
you
not easy, by the
communicate.
way. It's
What's
it is
that?
it is a subtle art is the thing, because I've known so many guys who are very bad at it. I'm sure there are women that are bad at it too. And I do think that's one of many kind of in-person uh, techniques or art forms that has degraded because people don't do it. Like there are
Right.
guys online that give classes like pickup artists, and it's these terrible techniques on how to approach women. It's like what you got to do is you got to kind of insult them a little bit, and they'll lower their self esteem enough that they'll want to date you, because it's like, well, this guy's probably the best I can get. But it's people watch that because it's like, well, no, I don't have that experience of like you go online, you can just pretend to be somebody else. It's not the same thing. In person, you've got to pay attention to what you're wearing and how you're standing and the tone of voice you're using. And it is that, and a lot of things have been lost. I like one generational difference for me. I feel like my parents' generation liked to haggle, for example, when buying a car, and this whole game of back and forth, like, wow, I can't go 18,000 on this thing. No, I'm sorry. Boy, could you go 16? I think 16's the highest I can go. And the salesman's like, well, no, we've got more than, and you're both lying to each other, and it's just a game. I hate that. I wish I could order a car the way I order stuff on Amazon. Like, there it is. You click, this is it. Here's the financing. You click on it and it shows up at your house at some point. There was a time when those type of conversations used to happen at furniture stores in all sorts of settings, and that was a whole category of human interaction. And there are other countries, especially I'm told that in the Middle East, this is still a huge deal. That if you go up to allegedly a food vendor on the street, that there's this thing where they will be like, "No, just take it," and then you have to say, no, it's worth at least $1. Like, it's a little haggle exchange because it's just built into the culture. That's a thing where in the era of just buying stuff online, I can't fathom that. That to me is the most awkward possible conversation to have. But I think people of my parents' generation liked it. They saw it as like a sport. They could tell all their friends, like, "No, I got this thing. Got them to knock off 2,000 from the sticker price." And but it's a type of conversation that I can't imagine like Gen Z enjoying that exchange, or going to a dealership and having to talk the guy down, or having to insult the car until he agrees to give it to you for less money. But no, I think you could sit here and list all sorts of types of in-person exchange that kind of doesn't happen anymore, or at least not in the same way.
That was why the dealerships wanted to go to the internet, because they knew that there was a demographic that was growing and building that wasn't going to buy a car on haggling, and so they're like, hey, we can just shoot them a price. And you get the old guys, they're like, well, what do you mean we're going to give them a price? Is that going, I ain't going to make no money off of that, But the those of us that were young enough to just see the potential there, that's why I was like, I want all the emails to come to me, because I'll weed through the trash and get to the good customers, and they're like, no, don't work that way. You're going to have to divvy them out. So I dealt with mine, my 10 that I got a week, and hopefully got, 2 or 3 sales out of it, but they saw a demographic that was emerging, and it is pretty much how it's done. It's completely shifted.
But I love how your first experience with the technology was trying to control the flow of information, because that is the battleground. I mean, my previous industry was destroyed because once upon a time you could make money by making content and putting it on a website, and then you would have ads on the website. Well, social media came along and Facebook came along and said, hey, we will just scrape the best parts of your article, host them on our thing called Facebook, and we'll sell ads against that. And so all of our advertisers, these big advertisers used to pay 6 figures for these ad deals. Facebook came and said, hey, we've got all the eyeballs, and all of those ad deals started to flow right to Facebook, two companies, Facebook and Google, because all they did was that subtle thing of, instead of the traffic coming to the page of the guy who wrote the article, we want it to come here. We just a subtle redirection, and trillions of dollars pivoted with that, with them winning that war, because people don't use websites anymore. They use apps, they use social media, they use Reddit, they use these aggregators. But the idea of running a website, making money off it, is gone with the dinosaurs, and that's why, because of that exact same thing. It's like, I want the link to lead here instead of there, and that's a few gigantic corporations have kind of molded the whole thing around that.
Yeah, and seeing as we're talking about people who have become quite dependent on the internet and technology, there is a prominent character who we find out is an incel. And I don't think, I hope it's not a spoiler to say it in terms such as that. I haven't said who the character is, but if it is, then we can rewind, edit that like it didn't actually happen.
No, you can't. We can't talk about the book without getting into stuff like that. So every interview I'm doing, I'm just trying to advise people before they send them to it. Some people want to be totally blind going into a book. Like, for them, finding out anything about it is a spoiler. If we're going to talk about the themes of the book or whatever, and specific stuff that happens, we have to get into stuff that, in theory, you don't find this out until, like, I don't know, 20% of the way into the book. But it's kind of like a trailer for a Hollywood movie. They show you scenes from more than halfway through the movie because they've got to show you stuff. Well, it's the same thing. If we're going to discuss the themes of the book, we kind of have to get into things that happen. So I think it's fine. If there are any listeners out there who are listening, if you are afraid of finding out anything about the book, pause, go read the book for a few days, and then resume, because the discussion will probably be more fruitful if you have read it first anyway. But for those of you who have no idea who I am and you want to know what the book is about, stay tuned, because we're gonna get into it. But yeah, the thing about like saying this person is an incel, like that personality type, the young man who hates women, has always been a thing. What the internet gave us, and what this book touches on, is the ability for those people to form a subculture to where they can all find each other, to the point that they are like a force in politics now, because there's like a specific kind of like conservative politics that takes root among these like young, sexually frustrated young men who got their Tinder account maybe, and then swiped right at 6,000 times and didn't get a single match. And then it's like, well, okay, I guess society has no use for me anymore. And that frustration has to go somewhere. And usually it's not somewhere productive, in my experience.
Yeah, and was there any, I suppose, not reluctance, but just awareness that there might be certain people within the readership who would push back or be like, oh no, you've written an unlikable character there. And, just being mindful of that.
I think there's a fringe of readers, or in many cases, like very young readers who kind of react in a weird way. You'll occasionally see them where they've like read Lolita for the first time, like, how was this book allowed? And it's like, well, books books expect you to come in with a certain level of like maturity and to understand I'm reading this through the eyes of a monster, or a person with monstrous impulses, and so you have to recognize that this is not necessarily endorsing that person. So here, uh, yeah, you have somebody who has adopted hateful views, but also, as with any of these people, you can see how they got there, and you can see the system that helped kind of program them. Because if you want to go on TikTok or YouTube or any of these platforms that act like they are very heavily moderated, if you click on a video that's about it's some dude talking to a camera about how women are all gold diggers and how blah 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 whatever, they will start feeding you more and more and more of that same thing. They will take you right down that pipeline because it's like, oh, this is what you like. And the system is not trying to create incels or or mass shooters. It just knows people who liked this also tend to watch this and like that. So here you go. Now you're being fed a buffet of look at all the ways you've been wronged by women, and then look at all the ways you've been wronged by feminism, and then look at all the ways you've been wronged by immigration. Like they just take you right down this path of you're frustrated because you can't get a girlfriend. You've been told now that the system is stacked against you and against you ever finding love. And then, well, who do I blame for that? And once you have an angry young man trying to find out who to blame for the state of his life, there will always be somebody out there saying, hey, if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, I will tell you who to blame. If you buy my book, if you whatever, I will tell you exactly who's, because it's not your fault. It's nothing you're doing. It's not your grooming or your attitude. No, 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 no. It's whatever. It's the enemy out there. So without trying to turn this person into like a cartoon villain, it's just trying to show that this person and lots of people in that same boat are usually starting from a place of an unmet need, and something that they wish they had in their lives, and they may not even necessarily know what's missing in their lives. And I think it's the same for almost every hateful person you run into. They didn't come out of the womb being like that. Well, I know a couple of people that probably came out of the womb being like that, but for the most part, they were things occurred that put them in that place and in that headspace. And and so on social media, there's just an entire ecosystem that's happy to cater to you as a customer, that's happy to cater to your rage. So it's not letting anybody off the hook. It's just we're all people who exist in a system, and all of us are susceptible to this stuff to different degrees.
Yeah, there seems to be a real lack of accountability and a lack of kind of looking inward when things go wrong. And I think when you couple that with the fact that, well, yeah, sometimes unfair things do happen, or you're born into shitty circumstances. So you have those two things together, and it is very easy to see how people become incels or things of that nature. And I've met people like that, and I've tried, talking to them, and some things that they've said, I've just been like, but you're making a generalization. You're saying all women are blah blah blah, and it's like it's objectively wrong because it's not all women, because what you're saying has not been, my experience. We can maybe say that you have had a lot of these negative experiences, but it's misplaced rage. It's directing anger in the wrong direction.
And it doesn't take long before you hear them use phrasing that you can tell they borrowed from some streamer they listen to or something. Like they've got this very specific scenario or slogan, or there's terminology that you can tell is not theirs. That's just something they heard in that group. It's like, this is the way we talk. And it's like, oh, you realize you've kind of joined a cult and this person is doing this for a profit. Yeah. So it's in trying to be realistic about what type of this book is a collection of characters whose personalities have all been warped to different degrees by by this ecosystem, and that happens to be his way. But the book features a lot of people who in some cases are just misanthropes, like they've just decided that humanity is garbage. And in that case, it's kind of the same thing. It's like they wound up on a feed that's just showing them, depravity. It's like, well, yeah, but that's not what you see when you go outside and walk around your neighborhood. You just see your neighbors and your friends and little kids playing and walking their dog. But it's like, yeah, but I get online and I see, I've trained my algorithm to feed me videos of people committing street crimes and immigrants burning down cars or stuff like that, or rioting. And now I'm afraid. It's like, yeah, but that's not what you're seeing with your own two eyes out in the world. Why do you trust what you're seeing on the screen versus what you're experiencing? And if the screen tells you that the world is full of villains, then yeah, it's very compelling. And because people kind of want to hear that for some strange reason.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about, people having almost this new language and these buzzwords. I mean, at the moment, people who seem to think traditional media is all a conspiracy. I've noticed, this last year, The Matrix and legacy media seem to be the two kind of buzzwords that these type of people are using. But I mean, what I kind of hate about all of this is whatever viewpoint you have, there seems to be so much point scoring, and people will take a clip of a speech and then be like, right, that is what has been said. It could be on the left, it could be on the right, it could be any political persuasion. It might not even be political, but they'll doctor it to serve their own agenda. And usually, if you look at it in context, it's not actually what's been said, or it's missing key parts of the overall context.
Yeah, and that's what the central thrust of this book is. You're watching a piece of information try to travel through that ecosystem where every player has motivation to make certain things be true, and that motivation has nothing to do with what actually is true. Like you've decided you have a worldview, and so there are moments in the story that hopefully, if I've done it well, are both very funny but also infuriating to read, because it's like you've seen this happen before, where they've got a piece of information and they have just tweaked it a little bit and put it out into the world, and then the way they tweaked it was in a way that's going to create outrage or fear or whatever emotion makes stuff go viral that gets you the engagement. And you can watch, it's like, yeah, but the truth is being mutated through each attempt to try to get it out to the world, or for each party trying to get the engagement, to get the eyeballs on them. And you can watch them all kind of pulling at, it's like a bunch of people fighting over a dress and they're ripping it to shreds as they're pulling it. It's like, yeah, but what you actually wind up with is not going to be the thing you were trying to get, because in the effort of all these different parties pulling it, you have ripped it and torn it and pulled it into a shape that nobody can recognize. And you can watch that every day, especially in an election year. And I know that not a single listener wants us to descend into election year talk, but this is, politics occupies so much of our culture now. And I hate it. I hate the fact that you go on Twitter on any given day, and of the top 10 trending subjects, half of it is politics. And I don't mean if you click on the politics tab, I mean just it has infused our entertainment and everything. And trying to use those platforms to learn about what's going on in the world, just the bare facts, is all but impossible because they have been optimized so well to favor, like you said, whatever is however we can twist this to make it the worst possible version, so that to the point that if there is word of you read about whatever, a Trump scandal, and then you find out that the thing that headline was kind of misleading, and actually it wasn't nearly as bad as what the headline implied, in fact was just kind of stupid. There's no mechanism of saying, oh, well, that wasn't, even he's not as bad as that or whatever. It doesn't work like that. It's like, no, it's we just double down. We just keep coming back to, it's like, well, this one thing may not have been true, but that just shows you how bad they are, that we thought it was true for a moment. It's like, that sounds like a road to madness that you're describing right there, where the truth kind of doesn't matter anymore. But I'm not interested in an argument about which side lies more or worse, because ultimately it is about trying to have a conversation about a complex subject in that ecosystem is like trying to have a complex conversation in a very noisy nightclub or a bar where they've got the music cranked up so loud that you can't even hear yourself think. It would be like if you were trying to talk to your grandfather about his will and his estate planning in a nightclub with like a stripper on his lap. It's like that setting, the information is not going to transfer in that setting. And I think of it that same way. When I see people trying to hash out the truth on Twitter, it's like, buddy, you're not in a place where the truth can survive very long. You're in a place where people want to dance and to feel weird things, and the last thing they want to do is be informed.
Yeah, it's crazy because to me, it's like they could discover that there were unicorns, and you could see that on social media, and that post wouldn't get any likes. But then you twist it to dangerous animal could actually kill kids, you know, and suddenly it's got 12,000 likes every time. It's a fucking unicorn. Okay, we should be celebrating that there was a unicorn that farts a pink and rainbow colored rainbow. We should be, and it flies. But no, we're worried about it killing kids because there's no other reason why. It's just fucking because. I
No,
got
but
more clicks.
you will hear people, for example, talk about like, well, we spend all this money on whatever, but we can't cure cancer. It's like, we've actually reduced cancer deaths by like 75% over the last 30 years. We have made miraculous advancements in survival rates. There are cancers that I know people have had, they had it 20 years ago and they're still alive. It's like, a colon cancer or whatever that would have killed you when I was a child, that they're so good at the detection and the surgery and all that. It's like, no, we've made huge strides, but those headlines don't go viral. They just don't. So there's such a bias toward negativity that you can actually, I used to love to, whenever they would release economic news, no matter which direction it went, it was always framed as disaster. So unemployment went up, the stock market crashed because it means interest rates are going to stay high. And unemployment went down, well, that's also bad news because it means a recession is coming. It's like, so what would be the good news? That it just stays the same? Like it's the same thing. It's like, I to this day, I can't figure out if a strong dollar is good or bad for the economy. Because if they're like, oh, the dollar is very strong, that's going to kill exports or imports or something. And same thing, like a weak dollar, it's like, oh, here we go. America's failing. Its currency is weak against the whatever. And everything will always be, and this actually comes up in the book. I don't think this is a spoiler, but they were talking about that if in the future they find a series of technologies that basically stops climate change in its tracks and it starts to reverse itself, I can tell you with 100% certainty that will be reported as bad news. It will all be about like, oh, but these windmills we put up, they're killing birds And we've got this nuclear power plant that leaked some radiation. Like, whatever we do that fixes the problem, we're only going to hear complaints about it. And the fact, like, oh, okay, technically temperatures dropped for the first time in the last decade, and it does appear that we fixed that problem. That headline will get buried, just as we don't talk about like the ozone layer anymore, or acid rain, things that used to be considered like apocalyptic problems that just quietly, once upon a time we thought that HIV was going to be the pandemic that ultimately wiped out civilization because we just keep mutating. It's like, no, we've quietly kind of cured it. It's Magic Johnson still alive, and there was no big moment. We didn't have the party of we did it. We beat AIDS in the 80s. We thought this was going to kill a billion people, and we kind of quietly won that war. Just moved on to the next scare, and that's how we do it. And it's weird because it feels so dismissive to tell somebody that the reason you're anxious is because you're on your phone reading bad news for 6 straight hours every night. But I if you had access, if you had lived in the 1970s and you had access to that level of technology, so that every genocide that was going on in the world, you could have seen videos from ground level of people having their heads hacked off with machetes, you would have had a worse view of the world back then too. It's not that things have gotten worse. It's just that it's all being brought before your eyes and on a device that's in your pocket. And if you told me that it does not in any way skew how you think, that would be to me, that would be such a weird thing to say. It would be the equivalent of if somebody told me that they eat 6 pounds of gummy bears a day and that it has no effect on their health. It's like, I don't believe you. A single gummy bear or one pack of them is probably fine. But if you're eating that volume of them, it has to be doing something to your insides. I just don't believe it. And it's the same thing. If you sit there and you doom scroll on your phone for the entire evening and then go to bed, I refuse to believe that you're not ruining your own health and your own sleep cycle and everything else.
Yeah, I always think what would happen or what would have happened if the JFK assassination happened during the internet age.
Or if 9/11 had happened during the goddamn smartphone age and you suddenly
Oh,
had
yeah.
1,000 streams of people from inside the building when they were trying to get out, streams of the buildings collapsing that
You
stayed
would have
on until the
interior
rubble.
shots of it. Yeah.
If they would have been on Facebook Live, they would have been live on Twitch, on all these platforms. People yelling into their cameras like, "Mom, I love you. We're going to try to get to the fire escape," and then they hear the sound of the building. Like we had the internet in 2001. We did not have
The
video that could
smartphone
be streamed to your
technology.
pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's I cannot overstate. And the same thing when people talk about the gory days of the 90s, they wish to go back to the 90s when everything was fun and cheap. And it's like, man, we had militias training in the woods. They blew up a federal building, including a daycare full of dozens of children in Oklahoma City. If you had smartphones from all those victims and all that rubble and seen what happened to those bodies when that bomb went off and what happened to those children, it would have been a whole different thing. There's so many moments that only because they're not documented as well that we see differently. And again, I'm not saying that this is entirely a bad thing. I think it's good that people see what happens on the ground in a war. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
should see that. I want you to know, let's not don't turn it into a propaganda film like in Desert Storm, where they had a bunch of these fun videos of like a cruise missile destroying the evil Iraqis headquarters, and wow, what wonderful technology. And it's all so bloodless and fun. And no, let's see it. Let's look at what burned bodies look like. Look at what modern weapons do to people, what they do to bodies. That this drone footage looks very cool and very bloodless and very clean. Look at it on the ground. Look at what that wedding looked like after that Hellfire missile landed in the middle of 70 people seated for a wedding. Look at what was left behind. Look at it. Understand it. Understand this about the world. I'm in favor of that. I would not go backward. I wouldn't undo this technology, but or as if I as if I could. But I also the running theme I bring up in every interview is that it is clear the culture has not caught up with this, and we're definitely not teaching our children how to handle it, how to process it very well, mainly because I think a lot of adults could not tell you day to day which platforms their kids are on, because it's not even TikTok anymore. TikTok is the usage has been going down. The kids have left TikTok. They found something else, and I don't even know what it is. I don't know where they went, but in terms of what kind of messages they're being exposed to, what kind of content they're being exposed to, I think most parents don't know, even if they're very attentive. I don't think, unless they've got a straight up ban on screens in their home, I don't think they realize what type of culture their kids are interacting with every day. Because in the past, they would have. When I was a kid, my parents knew who my friends were. They knew whose house I was going to. But if all of your social interactions are online, and if all of your friends are people you've met on Minecraft or Roblox or whatever online game kids play these days, it's like, do the parents still know? Do they know who their Minecraft friends are? Do they know what their circle of internet acquaintances are that live, kids that probably live all around the world? It's like, are they able to sit in on that and kind of vet that and making sure that they're not being, you know, indoctrinated into something? And I'm going to guess in most cases, no, because they don't know how. They wouldn't know how to eavesdrop on that.
So one of the things that you were saying before was you've got this big audience on TikTok, and then kind of with this book, you're trying to work out how do you translate that audience to a kind of 144,000 or however many words it is for this novel. And I mean, I kind of think, though, that this novel is almost like a culmination, or it fits really neatly with what you've been doing on TikTok for the past year. Even to the point where there were thematic similarities with some of the conversations between characters.
Yeah, and that's not an accident. I'm trying to bring people into. It's weird because, again, I'm somebody who wrote anonymously for the first, decade of my career. I did not want personally to be associated with the writing. I wanted it to be its own thing, but that's not the era we're in. You kind of have to introduce yourself as an individual and say, without saying it, look, I am an interesting person with interesting thoughts and observations. Surely, if you enjoy my little videos, then you will enjoy this book I wrote because it's like one of my little videos, except on paper and long. But I do think in theory that anybody that enjoys listening to me on a podcast or watching me on TikTok would uh, find that this is much of the same. It is trying to notice things about the world that are interesting while also uh, you're on this roller coaster careening toward what looks like some kind of certain disaster. But this is all, I don't want to make it sound like I've got a corporate strategy. Like I have built a brand that will make people believe in the quality of my prose. Uh, but I am trying to reach people. And that's, to me, it's about just trying to go out into the world in the ways that we're allowed to do it now with the technology, and trying to find people that would legitimately find the book interesting or fulfilling, or that may change the way they think somehow. I'm not trying to uh, sell merch. I'm not trying to be where it's like, yeah, buy this branded t-shirt or hoodie or my book. All of the, which I think of the like the YouTubers doing, where they've just got a range of stuff and the book is just one more thing that's got their name on it that the super fans can buy. So I never want it to be like that. I don't love the idea of somebody saying, I want to, I follow this TikTok influencer. I want to buy this influencer's book. Hopefully they will understand I've been writing fiction since before the internet existed, in high school, before anybody had an internet connection in their homes, and that this is me trying to reach another generation of readers. And I don't think I have a lot of children that are fans on there, but I do have people who maybe were not reading stuff in 1999, and that are at an age where I've hopefully introduced it to a new group of people. But I can speak intelligently on what it's like to have an internet poisoned brain, because I've been on here every day for now, more than half my life. And the knowing what internet brain looks like, it's one of the few subjects I can speak with authority on.
Yeah, do you ever do things to kind of try and mitigate, for want of better phrasing, your own internet poisoned brain? Or are there things that you're mindful of, or systems that you put into place, I suppose, to stop it getting even more riddled with internet poison?
It's funny because I think when I say the things that I do, they're going to sound ridiculous. Like, I make it a point to do my own yard work because that forces me to go out in the sun and do something for an entire afternoon that is interacting tangibly with the world. I hate to bring that up as an example, because the phrase people will shout at each other is touch grass. They're telling somebody they're too online, or their brain's been too warped. They'll say, go out and touch some grass. Well, I'm literally doing that. I'm literally going out and mowing my lawn. There are little things like that where I try to force myself. During the pandemic years, there was a brief period where, like, the convenience of having your groceries sent to your house, they're like, wow, they just show up right at your door. That's so easy, and you're only paying like $100 extra for the service. Uh, and very intentionally tried not to get addicted to that convenience, to get out and go do that stuff myself, to force myself things that could be, if I could have food delivered, but saying, no, let's go to the restaurant, let's do it, get out and interact with humans. These are all meager and sad steps, and I cannot act like I'm a hero for doing that instead of keeping myself planted behind a screen all the time, because my screen time is horrifying. It's pretty much every minute that I'm awake. And when I'm doing something that, I'm driving, I've got a podcast going. I'm doing the thing that I know is bad for the brain, where it's constant input, but never no quiet time to process it, which is what the brain needs. This is why, we love having hobbies where we will sit and quietly do something like gardening. It's because your brain craves that, some silence. And there are so many people who get no silence throughout their day. It's where it's just constant, constant scrolling, constant reading, constant listening. That's bad for the brain. I know for a fact that is. I'm very unhealthy in that way, because I'm always looking at something or listening to something, to prevent the danger of a thought occurring in my head.
Yeah, so when you're doing yard work, you are also listening to a podcast, or something of
But
that
see, I
nature?
can't, because the lawnmower was too loud. That's
Ah,
why I specifically chose that
yeah.
task. It's like, no, this has to be done with white noise. See, because the people, for example, people talk about great ideas occur to them in the shower. It's like, well, why do you think that is? It's like, that's the only time of day you're giving yourself silence and white noise, and you're allowing your brain to actually do its thing. And yeah, you did have a great insightful idea in the shower, because that's the first time you allowed yourself to stop ingesting information and let the brain do the work of processing the information, and then actually thinking your own thoughts. But boy, a lot of us, because I now see they sell devices where it's like, it's a thing you put in your shower. Listen to a podcast while you're in the shower. It's like, never allow yourself one moment of silence ever. Don't ever let yourself contemplate your life or anything. Always just have new stuff coming in all at all times. So if there's anybody out there who has successfully rearranged your lives to not have that, tell me how you did it. Drop me an email. Let me know. I will try it.
I have worked out too many kinks and stories that were really bugging me by cutting grass. It
Yes.
it it, it works, and I wrote a blog about it. It just, I don't know if anybody read it, but I mean, it's basically about how if you do a monotonous task that requires very little thought, something that you can do that is rote. In other words, it's the same thing over and over and over again. Your brain will begin to fill in gaps in things that you were thinking of. And that's my go-to. If like, man, I'm stuck on something, I need to go cut some grass. Mom, I'm cutting your grass. And so I go and I do the whole shebang, and I usually work out something. And it's therapeutic, I think. That's why I like to do it, because it gives me that, like you said, it's that white noise.
The very first fiction I wrote in my entire life was when I was in high school, and I had a part-time job in high school and in the couple of years after, working at a print shop. So at a print shop, you've got a company that has ordered whatever 50,000 sheets of letterhead, and somebody has to print that stuff. So you would have these big machines, and the way somebody like me working there, you set up the machine, you get the colors right, you get the ink set up right, and you get it all adjusted, you turn it on, and then from that point on, your job is to watch the machine and make sure it doesn't jam, and then you let it do its thing. Just white noise. And standing there over that machine, that was some of those most creatively productive. I had a little notebook where I would jot down ideas of stuff, because I I had something to do. You're constantly watching it, making little adjustments, paying attention. You can't fall asleep, but it let that other part of my brain work, because just the sound of the machine, it's repetitive. I'm not being asked to do anything with my brain. I'm not being asked to solve a problem consciously. So that back end of your brain, the subconscious that is always working on stuff, sometimes an idea, or as you said, like the solution to a problem in a plot, will just appear as if by magic. And this is why old timey poets thought that they had like a magical muse that was giving them this stuff. It's like, well, you have that, but it's just the non-conscious part of your brain, which never stops working. So anytime you have a creative problem, think about it very intently, really try to take it apart, and then push it out of your brain, and then go. A lot of authors said they would go take a walk. Agatha Christie
Mm-hmm.
said she would just go for a walk in the woods. I think Stephen King says he would get on the treadmill. I think, but they've all got something like that where it forces you to not be writing. You put down the pen, you're away from the typewriter, and go somewhere where you've either got silence or white noise. I think white noise is better for somebody like me with attention deficit problems, like having, and then it will seem to your employers or to anyone else like you're wasting time. That's one issue with trying to manage creative workers, is because, like, well, he hasn't written anything. It's like most of writing happens away from the keyboard, because the stuff has to occur to you. The stuff has to, you have to work it out. And a lot of times I can't productively work out those things in front of the keyboard. But if you let me go get in my car and drive somewhere for 2 hours, I guarantee you that during that drive at some point, if I didn't put a podcast on and let myself just listen to the road, the solution will appear fully formed in my head.
Yeah, I feel that this conversation is maybe giving me a revelation or a breakthrough that now seems like it should have been obvious. But, it's very rare that I'm in silence. And I think, like, for years now, for over a decade, I've been obsessed with being productive and optimizing my time. And obviously, with all the technology, that can mean like listening to a podcast, listening to an audiobook. Because I'm studying Japanese, it can be getting Japanese input as well. And it's like, when am I actually in silence? And the only time, unless I'm with someone else and we're going for a walk, is when I purposely decide there's a story problem, I don't know how to get out of it, so I'm going to go for a walk without headphones on. And invariably the solution comes to me. And so really, I mean, that there's an irony that it seems possibly to be more productive or to be more efficient, you've got to do less, not more. You've got to have, these moments of silence. But then I can already see how my brain is like, well, how would I schedule that? Which is a dangerous way to do it, because I'm still trying to even optimize these moments that aren't meant to be optimized.
This is why I think when because I'm approached by young writers all the time asking me, well, how do you do it? How do you become, like, I want to become a full-time novelist. How do you do it? It's like, one, don't try to do that. It's almost impossible. But two, like, one of my huge advantages has always been the type of day jobs I've had gave me brain space to, because the job that I had before I actually got work full time doing writing, and that was in 2007. But prior to that, I was doing data entry at an insurance company. So data entry just means somebody filled out a paper form and you have to put it in the computer. It's all just numbers. So it is extremely mindless because you have to do it like 1,000 miles an hour. You're still just ripping sheets, pages, and then typing, pulling the page, typing, and you get into such a rhythm where you are working, your brain's doing something, but the creative part of my brain, the problem solving problem part of my brain is not being engaged. It's the whatever part of your brain, if you're doing some repetitive task, makes sure you do it right every time. But that is prime work to let the creative part of your brain wander and do its thing. If I hadn't gotten that type of a job, if I had gotten a job where I'd been forced to really think really hard every day and solve problems and that kind of thing, I think I would have come home every night without, on my little notepad, I wouldn't have had anything written down. I think it would have kept me too occupied. It's one of those things where when I talk about the advantages I did not have wealthy or famous parents. I didn't have any friends in the publishing industry. I didn't have anything like that, but I was fortunate in the type of jobs that I got that let me, that I could sit there and do somewhat repetitive, mindless work. I had multiple jobs like that in a row that by luck, I got those and let me do a lot of the thinking work that other people just don't get time to have. Plus, like, I don't have kids. If I had been having to try to help my wife, if I had been staying up all night with a newborn for several of those years, you think I would have been productive? I don't think so. So a lot of what has allowed me to do this is good fortune, but it's not good fortune in the sense that I won the lottery. It's just that I've been put into circumstances where I did have a chance to do this work, because finding the time is always the hard part, or finding the time when you still have the energy to actually do something, because doing something creative takes a lot of energy. It doesn't seem like it would, but it does. It leaves me exhausted. Like writing for 6 straight hours leaves me physically exhausted because you are forcing your brain to do a lot of work. Not everybody gets off work and can still feel like doing that, because the type of work they're doing is different. I'm sure if I had been a nurse or something, working 16-hour shifts of a stressful work and having to deal with insurance companies and doctors and patients and all that stuff, I don't think I would have gotten any of this done, because I would come home drained all the time. So yeah, that's the other thing. When people ask me, like, well, how do you arrange your life in a way that you're able to write novels? It's like, man, the first thing is going to be finding a day job that, God willing, if you're in the United States, has health insurance. Two, kind of pays the bills, but three, leaves your brain free to devote some of it to doing this creative stuff. And a lot of people just don't have that, and it's not necessarily anybody's fault. It's just the way things shake out. But they find it so much harder to get going, and I think they feel lazy or unproductive, because like, well, I've been working on this novel for 3 years, and Stephen King can write a whole novel in 3 months. It's like, not everybody's lives are arranged in the same way that allows that kind of work, where he could write for 80 straight hours without sleeping because he was jacked up on cocaine or whatever. So not everybody can do that.
Yeah, and talking about how you arrange your day and the writing, I mean, you said at the start that a lot of what has been going on for the past 10 or so months has been promoting or getting ready for the lead up to this book launch. So, I mean, have you pretty much been exclusively working on that? Do you divide your day in terms of promotion time and writing time? How many
My
days a week are you working?
my job as an author, and most authors' jobs in my observation, your day job is selling books, your night job is writing books. So for me, it's about 80-20. My life is, and nobody likes it when I say this, my life is about 80% promotion, 20% writing. And nonstop. Like there's not a period of my life where it's like, okay, I have to kick into promotion mode. I have to promote the books year round. Like we announced the pre-orders were out in January. The book was arriving in September. We announced it 9 months in advance. And that's how we do it because, a podcast appearance may generate like 25 copies being sold, which sounds like nothing. But if you do that steadily every day for 9 straight months, it actually adds up to quite a bit. Um, but it is a stupid amount of effort. And it is, I built up that TikTok account that now has 550,000 followers. The videos on there have been viewed more than 500 million times. That's I built up that following so that I could sell books to those people. That is all part of my like promotion budget in terms of how I'm divvying up my time and energy. But and if you add up throughout a week, maybe one day gets devoted to writing the next book. So like I'm writing the next book in the John Dies at the End series right now. But the rest of the time, I'm filming a TikTok video, I'm doing a podcast for somebody, I'm planning social media posts because I still maintain all of that stuff myself. The Twitter, the Threads, the Blue Sky, the Goodreads account, the YouTube page, the Instagram, the TikTok, the Substack newsletter, the MailChimp newsletter, all of it I'm managing by myself. I do not have a staff. And that is actually my job. If somebody asks me my job, I technically am an author. In reality, my job is book sales. And then I write on the side, I have to write the book that's being sold. And it sounds very cynical when I tell people that. People who aren't aware of how this works, they kind of hate that because it seems so sad. But in this ecosystem where people have infinite things they can be doing with their time, infinite video games they could be playing, because your competition is not other authors, your competition is Netflix or Twitch or whatever people could be doing instead of reading your stupid book. So it's like you've got to tear people away from these other things that, there's some company that spent $500 million making a blockbuster movie or a video game that's trying to entice them away from your book. And you have to wrestle those people back. You have to sell them on the idea, not just that this book might mildly amuse them for a couple of days, but that it's important that you don't want to miss this. And it's kind of the hard sell. And I know there are authors out there who don't have to do this because they're not on TikTok or whatever, but most of us, it's people in my boat where you have to go out and push it yourself, and you've got to build up your own platform, get your fans all together in one place and get them to have some faith in you, and then ask them to do something that is objectively ridiculous, which is I want you to spend $30 reading this 140,000 word document that most people would not read even if I gave it to them for free, which I know because in trying to get like blurbs from people, you send out hundreds of copies and most people do not read it, even though they did not pay a penny for it. So it's a big ask. It is. I respect what a difficult thing I'm asking people to do, to spend that much money on something that they're going to be able to blow through in a few days. I mean, it doesn't take that long to get through a novel. So it does not seem that weird to me that it is kind of a monumental task, but most people who are aspiring writers, the moment I tell them how much promotion I have to do, they get extremely discouraged. And I hate that. I hate that for them. I hate that it is the way it is. But if you know an easier way to get people to buy the books, again, send me an email and let me know, because I would get a lot more sleep at night if I didn't have to do this.
Yeah, it seems that even in the 11 years that we've been doing This Is Horror podcast, that there's more and more marketing and promotion that the author has to do. That's certainly the feedback that I seem to be getting from other authors and from my experience. And it doesn't seem so uncommon that, even if you're with a big publishing house, the publicity is going to be very, very limited, unless you're a very big name author. And then the irony is, if you're a big name author, such as Stephen King, well, just being Stephen King will sell it anyway.
Yeah, where his name is this big on the book and then the title
Right,
is somewhere
right.
underneath because people are just buying it for his name. But to be clear, and when I say this, I'm not saying that my publisher has abandoned me. They do a ton of work, like they're the ones who hit up the bookstores and the chains and try to get them to buy a bunch of copies, get them to put it out somewhere prominent. They will hit up some reviewers and stuff like that. They'll set up some appearances. They do some stuff, but 95% of it is done by me. And the system's set up so that it kind of has to be. Like, the publisher can't run my TikTok account. It's got to be my stupid face and my stupid voice on there, or else people don't watch it. So it's the same thing in like my Twitter and all that. The reason people will engage with it is because it's me, because it's authentic. You're hearing directly from the author. If I was a big enough big shot, yeah, I would be able to hire an intern to just run my accounts, and then they just announce when the next book is up or when there's news on a new movie or something. But the way I do it and the way I have to do it is people want to hear from me. So no, the publisher can't do this podcast appearance for me. They can't do my Instagram post for me. It's got to be me, and I could maybe hire somebody to take care of some of the technical things. Like if I do a video and they're the ones who upload it to all of the other platforms to make sure it's also up on Reels and on YouTube Shorts and all that, whatever. But that wouldn't save me that much time. Ultimately, what this system wants is me as an individual, my face and my voice and my thoughts and my whatever. They want access to me and my personality, which again, you're talking to somebody who used to write anonymously. I did not want the audience to know even who I was. This is now an era, starting with the social media era, when if you want to sell a book, you're selling yourself as an author. And then, oh, because you like me and my personality so much, you will also surely like this book. I would not have created the world to be that way if I was in charge of it. But again, I realize not everybody has to do this, but my Instagram or whatever is full of, it's a young author they have rolled out there, and they're on Instagram posting their vacation photos because that's part of their job as an author to say, look at this beautiful vacation I went on. Aren't you interested in this life I'm living? Or won't you also therefore be interested in these books I've written? And it feels weird to do that. It feels weird to have to sell yourself as a personality to get people to buy the books, but that is the way it works in the influencer era that we're in. This is why you have YouTubers selling their brand of freaking chocolate bars. There's like a Mr. Beast candy line, and Logan Paul has an energy drink line that the kids all love. And it's like, in a world where very soon AI will be able to generate a book, it's going to be even more important that you can say, hey, flesh and blood human here. That's associate when you see my name on the book cover, associate it with this flesh and blood person, because right next to it on the shelf very soon is going to be a book with a human sounding name that was written by a robot that the publisher did not have to pay an author a penny for, because they had a piece of software that they just hit a button and it cranked out a mystery whodunit. And then that will be what you're competing against, because they will be able to crank out infinite of those books. And so it's not going to get any better in the future. Being able to say, hey, I am a human who bleeds red blood and I wrote this book for you, that will be the big selling point. But it is going to require turning on a camera and getting in front of a microphone and introducing yourself to people. And some people simply can't do it. And I understand some people's personalities, like they're mortified at the thought of having to do what I do. I get it. But I basically had to teach myself to do it just in the last few years.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about, potentially competing against AI authors, because in Japan, I mean, there's a lot of shyness in terms of being on social media. So a lot of people have avatars and they have like literal kind of virtual aliases. But then we're seeing a weird thing where if I ask junior high school students, who their favorite celebrity is, it's a YouTube kind of robot, a VR YouTuber. So it is AI. So they're more interested in this robot than actually hearing from a human, and it's a bizarre trend. But I guess that's what a lot of teenagers are into right now in Japan.
Okay, but Bob, you work in cell phones, right?
Yes.
So isn't the latest iteration of these phones, isn't they all have new like AI integration? Isn't that the whole like the entire selling point of this next generation of phones?
Yeah, it's and I want to say it's very kind of. I mean, some of the phones have access to Chat GTP. To me, it's very elementary because like you can circle things with your camera and it'll look things up. So it's like an advanced form of Siri or advanced form of Ask Google. Um, there's with the new iPhone, we're going to roll out probably in the next month is going to be Apple Intelligence, which is going to allow your iPhone to do the same thing that the Googles can do, your Androids can do. And so that's, I see a lot of people that are interested in that, but I also see an almost equal sized population who are like, if you even try to tell them about that, it's like, and there's a way that you can turn that off, right?
See,
And
this
they're
is
like,
where I
yeah, there's a way you can turn it off. Like, especially with the Androids, it's like and if you even say, and it has AI technology, I mean, half my customers will go, and I can turn that off. I'm like, yes, you can actually turn the whole thing off to where it doesn't do it. And I show them how to do it, and they're like, oh, okay, well, I'd like to go ahead and get that phone. Which, when it here in the way the American phone carrier system works, they don't pay us for the phones. We could care less if you buy a phone. They pay us for the service. So they want us to take an account and add more lines to it. We want a new customer coming in that's switching carriers. That's where they make their money. The the big companies, your Verizon, your AT&T, they don't make money from the devices. They could care less. They're going to write them off. That's why they give them away. It's an advertising expense. So, but that's what draws the people into the stores. So the AI stuff is coming. They're shoving it down our throats, but I have a feeling that in a couple of years, it's going to be a nothing burger when it comes to the tech. Um,
see. I keep saying the same thing too, but I don't know if I'm just old and out of touch because it does nothing for me. None of the AI stuff does anything for me.
no,
I've not found a use for it.
no, it's not anything different than what I've seen. It's just they're repackaging the same thing. You know, it's like now Siri's more intuitive. So Siri was intuitive to begin with. I haven't seen any changes in that. And again, with Apple Intelligence, give me about 2 months, and I might have a different story on that. But I really just don't see it. What I've seen on the Androids is, with the Android experience, it's very similar to what we've had previously. Yeah, you can open up your camera and you can draw a squiggly line, and it'll put a snake on the picture, and then you can modify how the snake looks. So if you're taking a picture of a table and you put a squiggly line on it, the AI will go, oh, you're wanting a snake. Okay. And if you don't want a snake, you can do something else, and it'll change it. I've seen that with the Google Pixel that actually happens. Someone showed me that. They're like, hey, look, you can take a picture and you can draw a squiggly line on it, and it puts an image of like a photograph of a snake on that picture. And I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty cool. I said, but couldn't you just find a snake and take a picture of it? You know, and
Because
it's
at
what you're
least
talking about.
there's a
Like we're going to be competing with AI books. This is a time that style and weirdness is going to be king. That's going to how you're going to tell a human writer. You're going to have your own style and be very, very, very weird with it.
because with like Michael, your story about the sort of AI avatar that became an influencer or whatever, at least usually there's still a human behind it making creative decisions. And like the thing you just described, Bob, that's still a thing in theory that is to help you unlock your creativity. If you want to, add animals to your photo or whatever, at least that is a person making a creative choice, and then the tech is helping you execute it. The
Mhm.
dream on the part of the studios and the publishers and all that is to not have to pay a person at all to get that they can have a thing that can just crank out. So the idea of having where they've got a robotic influencer that they don't have to pay, that's not taking a cut of everything, but they can still put that face and voice on things. They can still sell merch, they can sell products, only they get to keep all the money because there's not a celebrity, there's not a Mr. Beast or whatever who is demanding, to get rich off of it too. They've got just a piece of software. I don't know. It's so easy for me to say, well, that would never replace interaction with a real person. But there are entire, like, you can find subreddits where people have AI friends and that they've got the software and they've kind of fallen in love with this imaginary AI replica of a person. And among the kids who are very kind of moldable in terms of how their brains and personalities work, I don't know if they're going to necessarily be able to tell the difference if you create, because kids already have, they love imaginary friends. They love believing that like their teddy bear is alive and real and they can have a conversation with it. And that right now they could make, in theory, and it probably exists, a teddy bear that does talk to them and has conversations with them and would give the illusion of being alive and of loving them back, which is the thing every person wants. But it's ultimately just a piece of software who's like going through a tree of responses. And if you make it complicated enough, it sounds just like you're talking to a person. I have absolutely done tech support chats where it lasted for a few minutes before I realized I was not talking to a person, that I was talking to an AI bot that had been programmed to sound with phrases that sound personable and that sounds like a person talking.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. I don't know. I feel like everybody reaches a certain age where the next big technological leap is scary to them, and I hope I'm not just doing that. I hope I'm not just being old and cranky. I do not see any positive outcome of an AI that pretends to be your friend, or that pretends to be an influencer, or pretends to be a celebrity, and that gets you to love them and then buy their stuff. Because if there's no person to connect with, I don't know. I don't like that at all.
Yeah, I think that if we're talking about the arts, if we're talking about publishing, we're talking about creative movies and things like that, and using AI. To me, I feel that a lot of this is coming about because the people who run the publishing companies, the people who run the studios and things like that, are not creatives, or they haven't been in the creative mindset for a long time. And I think that if somebody who had any type of clout or any type of pull in a company who had a creative mindset would see, hey, this is not a good idea, because people ultimately, like you said, they want to interact with other people. You know, I don't fear that AI will ever take away my job. What I do fear is that AI is going to reduce how much money I make. I will still be doing the same job, but I just won't make the same amount of money. And I fear that that's what's going to happen in publishing, um, because their AI is not going to get rid of me. They're going to try to pay me less,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that's the people who make those decisions are not creatives. They're probably very good at what they do, which is making money.
Yeah, and they can look at a balance sheet and say, well, gosh, if we didn't actually have to pay the creative, we would make X amount of more money. It's just, but often if they're not, yeah, because like the film studios, once upon a time, they were run by Hollywood people. They were run by former agents and people and producers, people that had climbed their way up, the ladder, but they were film people. And now they're run by, finance bros and people that came from the world of money. And they're the ones who it's like, well, why don't we just only make superhero movies? Like, that's what makes the money. Why were we making all this weird stuff and not realizing that it takes a creative person to understand that the audience doesn't know what they want until they see it. Nobody was asking for Star Wars before Star Wars came around. They thought when they saw the dailies on that film in the late 70s, they're like, this is the biggest turd. We might as well just flush the money down the toilet. And it was only when it came out in theaters, audiences went wild for it. They're like, oh, okay, this thing we allowed this weirdo to make and go way over budget on. It turns out we tapped into something. But if you tried to just break it down into an algorithm of here's what worked last year, therefore do more of what worked last year, you're just going to see the returns just shrink and shrink and shrink, because that's how creativity works. Audiences want to be surprised by something weird. That's what's fun to look at, is something you've never seen before. But if you're endlessly just trying to remix Star Wars or Marvel or whatever, it starts to all feel the same. Which, again, if you're somebody who runs it based on spreadsheets, you think you're making a no risk decision because we're only going to stick with the stuff we know works. But guess what? Over time, it's going to stop working, because that's not what people want out of their entertainment. They want to have something catch them off guard. And you can't ask them in advance what they want, because they don't know. They're not creatives. They will know it when they see it. And an AI can't do that. An AI is not going to know how to, like, an artist is creating based on their childhood trauma and their undiagnosed personality disorders and their drug use. There's no piece of software that can replicate that.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about making creative decisions, I really love the afterword that you included in this book. And, one of the parts of that was, you said, in every circumstance in which I had to choose between the reality revealed in my research and a bit of fantasy that would make the story more entertaining, I chose the latter. And I mean, in terms of that research, I mean, was there a lot of research that went into the book, or were these things that you were kind of pulling on that you had accrued over years of experience and in creating these articles and these TikTok videos and these pieces of content, to use a terrible term?
It's I mean, on one hand, yes, this book took an unholy amount of research. I think people who don't write fiction don't realize how much homework it takes, because even if you're not writing, for example, a story that takes place during World War II, and you're having to research a bunch of stuff about World War II so you know how to talk about it. I don't even mean that. I mean, just everyday things about police procedure. It's like, well, what would the police do if this happened? And so you've got to look it up. And these days you have the internet. That's great. But in here, this is a road story. This is a road trip story. So figuring out where they go, what those places are like. We visited some of them. I didn't go to every location discussed here, but I've been to most of them, um, and trying to make sure that it's authentic and true to life. But I'm able to do this job because I've been just kind of an information and trivia junkie my whole life. And so when they invented the internet, like, I used to spend outrageous money on magazines. I was like a high school kid, and I had the Chicago Tribune, whatever big national newspaper I could get my hands on from my small little town, I would get it. And I would just read all of this stuff. I just hoovered up information. So that's the thing that attracts people to my TikTok and to my columns. It's learning odd little facts about the world and interesting little tidbits. That's been my whole personality. I think mainly because from a young age, I didn't know how to talk to people. So I like to have some weird fact I could bring up, because that can drive a conversation, right? Like, if you can, if they mention something about any random subject, that you can pull it up, and it's like, well, did you know that there's actually a type of lizard that if you cut off its head, it will grow a new body or whatever, and something you read in a book 10 years ago. So this story is packed full of a lot of stuff that is true, but I also wanted very definitely to not let people think that I'm trying to do an expose on how any government agency or any corporation works. This is a story about people and about how these individuals have to live in this system and how they navigate it, and what kind of like unmet needs they have based on living in this system and the type of kind of social isolation that it creates. When you start getting into things like FBI procedure or how to build a bomb, I'm happy to completely make that up. That's not, you shouldn't be learning how to build a bomb from reading a piece of fiction. And I don't need you to have read this and feel like how the Department of Homeland Security or the FBI deals with like domestic terror threats or anything like that. I'm happy to make it up and then make it feel as authentic as possible and end it stop there. Some authors are not of that, like they want everything to be as genuine and true as possible. I'm fine with fictionalizing that stuff because that's not what it's about. This is not a police procedural. This is not anything like that. This is about a bunch of people stuck in a very stupid and terrifying situation and seeing how they navigate it. So this is one reason why in a lot of fiction they like characters that kind of rogue cops or loose cannons, because if you write the procedure wrong, you can always just say, well, yeah, they're rogue. Of course they didn't do it the way the real cops would do it because they're a loose cannon. Sue me.
Mm-hmm. The thing that I found fascinating about it is like after reading it, thinking about how each one of the incidences that happen, and there's hundreds of things. Any one of these things could have happened. Any one of them could have happened in real life. But in this book, they'll only happen this way. And I find that because it is, we talk about the satire, the social commentary about, influencers and things like that. But at the same time, you've got a story that is unpredictable and extremely logical. And I love that because I couldn't figure out where it was going. And every time I thought I knew where it was going, you come up with something that just blindsided me. And I was like, oh shit, we have to deal with this now. And it was so tightly knit that you almost have to, like, if you want to think about the social commentary of it, you have to kind of set that part of the rest of the story aside to even think about it because it's just so intermeshed. So
I mean, I hope that nobody comes away from all of the press I'm doing about this thinking that this book it's somebody lecturing you about getting away from your screens for
no,
300 pages.
there's one hell of a story in there.
Yeah, it's, if I've done it correctly, it should feel the way the news has felt for the last, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, where it's like every day you log in, it's like, oh, now there's an earthquake in whatever city on top of everything else. Like, now there's what? Then now there's another war. There's another war break. What country is this? I never heard of this country. Where every day, because people will joke about like the script writers they're throwing us the people who write real life are throwing us a new twist or whatever. And it feels like that when you have total awareness of, and then you have politicians who their whole method of like staying visible is just clearly creating controversy or trying to say outrageous things. And there's like this fire hose of scandals and outrage. And I was trying to simulate in this story the feeling of just living in the world over the last decade or so when things feel like they have accelerated so fast, where you have this bizarre story just at the time we're recording this in the war in the Middle East with Israel. And they did this thing where they rigged a bunch of pagers to explode and killed like a dozen people and wounded thousands of others. And it's like such a cyberpunk thing to happen. I don't mean to make light of it. It's just, it's the kind of thing that would happen in like a Tom Clancy novel or something, that they secretly intercepted all of these walkie talkies and pagers and inserted, I guess, little tiny bombs into them. and then distributed them out to all of these, I guess, members of Hezbollah, and they sent out a killer signal that detonated them all simultaneously. Uh, that's the kind of thing that did not used to happen. And so, I mean, it's the kind of thing where you say, is that possible? Like, is that a thing that can be done? I guess it is. And it's the same thing with every headline that comes along with breakthroughs they claim they've done with AI. And there's headlines that we have astronauts stranded in space, and it's a total non-story. Nobody's following it. It's like, do you realize we have astronauts that are stranded in space and they're going to be there until February? They're going to be in, they will have been in space for like 9 months because their ship that's supposed to take them back to Earth malfunctioned. Like, that is a plot line out of a sci-fi novel. That can't be real life. And not only has it happened, but there's so much other weird crap going on that kind of nobody cares. And like once a year, somebody with the United States Air Force will come out and say, yeah, we've got more UFOs. We don't know what they are. There's some orbs flying around. We don't know what they are. It's like, all right, throw it on the pile. Sure. And you feel like it's your job to keep track of all of it, to be a good citizen, but it's kind of impossible. So I think every day, if you're somebody who is super online, you've had the experience of trying to follow a complicated news story and then watching it fall, just cascade like a waterfall across whatever platform you're using. If you're on Twitter, you're on whatever, and it's like, oh my God, somebody tried to shoot the president. Oh my God, they missed him by a millimeter. Oh my God, we've got video of the guy on the roof. And oh, we've got all of these different videos, and we've got the guy's manifesto and his social medias. And it's just, you feel like the stress of, is it my job to know all of this? And it's just it's that chaos, and it's a type of anxiety that I think is specific to our age, because I think it was very different when you would turn on the evening news at dinner and watch the news, and maybe that news was upsetting or whatever, but then you turned it off. And maybe you'd get up in the morning, you would read the newspaper that got delivered to your doorstep, and you'd read the paper, and then you're done, you drink your coffee, and then you go to work. But now you are away from the news. Now that the news is in your pocket, and the thing that they want is to get to where they keep trying to invent it, where it's a thing you wear on your head, so that in between the real world and your eyes is a screen where Apple dictates what you see of the universe. And that's a product that still has not caught on. They keep trying, because that's the dream, to have you truly never away from the feeds, to where when you're eating a meal, it's in front of your face. And when you're talking to another person, in between you and them is a screen in front of your eyes that displays information or distracts you. And it's like they're just trying more and more to intrude on you. And the way they do it is just by continually trying to tell you these stories that are scary and that you kind of don't have any control over. And that sense of helplessness is what I was trying to simulate in this book, where you're watching this situation careen out of control and you wish you could reach into the story and grab people and shake them by the shoulders and say, do you not understand what you're doing right now? And that's, I don't know, that's the way I feel every day to some degree.
Yeah, it occurs to me that, this technology and what they're trying to do, it's almost like what John Carpenter did with They Live is starting to become reality, or that feels like the overall goal now. And yeah, I don't know what the solution is here, but I do think with the story, you're obviously one of the things as the reader, you're trying to guess throughout what is in this black box of doom. And you're getting all these theories. The theories seem to be more and more ridiculous. But then what I like is, I guess, about halfway through, we then realize, oh, the black box of doom is also a metaphor for something else. So you've got two black boxes now.
Yeah, and it's fairly straightforward that if you're experiencing the world through a series of screens, then you are in somebody else's box. Like they are feeding you reality that they dictate. It's no longer what you're going out into the world and collecting with your own eyes and ears. It is being mediated by this software and these algorithms and these companies who only have one goal. Their goal is not to inform you. They have one goal, which is to keep you glued to the screen at all costs. So the moment you feel like, if you have a question on your mind, the moment you get the answer to that question and you're satisfied and you feel like you can walk away, they failed. The goal is not to give you an answer. The goal is not to let you get to a place where you're at ease because I wondered what was going on. I went and looked it up. Now I know. I'm going to put the thing down and go live my life. It's like, no, 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 no. Here's another little piece of information that casts doubt on what you think you know. Here's a weird theory about what happened. Isn't this interesting? The idea is to make you so you're so scared to walk away from it because of what you'll miss, even though it's an illusion. You actually personally can't do anything. I have been following, for example, the war in Ukraine, which has been going on for, I don't know, 3 years now. But I have Twitter accounts that I follow and they show like where the battle lines, and now like these days in the East, Russia is winning. They're pushing their way further and further and those front lines are collapsing. I follow that every day. I follow the reports of the ground they've lost. I follow the reports of how, like, when the weapon systems are going to arrive and is it going to make it in time? Is it going to matter that they've got F-16s now? There is nothing I can do about that situation. Nothing. Like, in theory, I could help inform who I vote for, or I could try to signal boost somebody trying to bring awareness to the situation. It is objectively a waste of my brain power and of my anxiety and my stress in my mind. I can't do anything to affect that situation. There's no reason for me to necessarily know about it, whether or not Russia winds up owning 25% of Ukraine and they draw new borders. That should not matter to me, but that is one of a buffet of things I could choose from, that if I wanted to become obsessed with it, and what I tell myself is, well, yeah, but this is better than, for example, being obsessed with some celebrity drama, like where I'm obsessing over what this celebrity said about this celebrity, or following the twists and turns in a rap beef. I tell myself that this is better because it's something that it's important and it has to do with real things in the world, but it's all the same. These platforms that are trying to get me to care about the war in Ukraine only care that I'm glued to the screen. Whether I'm glued to the screen watching war news or watching animal videos of like that baby hippo that's going viral at the zoo in Thailand, it doesn't matter. They only care that I'm glued to the screen. And if I'm glued to the screen and telling myself, well, I'm helping because I'm actually watching videos about a anti-police protest, or I'm watching stuff about the election. It's like, yeah, but you made up how you were going to vote like 5 years ago. Like, what are you actually watching? And it's like, you kind of are giving yourself permission to just stare at the feed, which is all they want. They always win if that's all you're doing. Because, hey, I could be going out and doing things in my community that would help people. There's somebody on my block, I can guarantee you, there's some elderly person that would love it if I would come mow their lawn for them, that they can't get out and do it because it's too hot or whatever. I could go up there with my lawnmower and fix and make their week. And I'm not doing that. I'm staring at news about Ukraine and thinking I'm doing a good deed by obsessing over these casualty figures. And it's a lie. It's a dumb lie that I've allowed myself to believe.
Yeah. Well, taking a kind of turn from one part of the media to another, I want to know, do you know where the fentanyl skin contact myth came from?
I don't know, because this still comes out. You will have police departments releasing a press release saying, "Hey, during this encounter, our officer got made contact with fentanyl and they had a seizure and had to be rushed to the hospital." And it does not work that way. But you still see it, and you see it fictionalized. I've seen it in multiple movies where there was one where an assassin killed people by getting fentanyl granules, like like rubbing it on their fingers or something, and that actually caused the person to have a heart attack or whatever. But that's like such a great example because fentanyl is deadly, and they're mixing it in. Every drug has a little bit of fentanyl in it. That's what killed Prince. He got painkillers that he thought were just painkillers. They had fentanyl mixed in with it. But that amount of deadliness is not enough. We have to invent some new weird thing. The same thing when I was a kid, they used to warn us that people were putting like needles and razor blades in the candy. And that never has happened even one time ever in the history of the world. That is a total hoax. It is a myth. But we had a police officer come to my classroom and warn us, do not accept unwrapped candy or any homemade candy. Do not accept unwrapped fruit from strangers because they're putting needles and razor blades and stuff in it, which is, with even a few seconds of thought, would be an insane crime that you could not possibly get away with. Every parent would remember which house sold the weird apples that turned out to have, they would trace it back to the person immediately. But the reality of the situation, which is that there are many children in your neighborhood being, or in your city being abused, and they're just being abused by their parents, or there's, the dad's a drunk, and so he beats the kid. That happens all the time, but we're bored with that. What we want is something weird, so we replace the real crime that definitely needs your attention with this weird science fiction crime. And it's like, no, fentanyl just as a thing that people use to get high and then they die from it, that's scary enough. The reality is scary enough, but people don't want that. They want some weird warning on Facebook that, like, well, now they're hiding fentanyl in children's candy and giving it to them for Halloween. It's like, there's no addict who's going to get rid of his fentanyl. He's hoarding that stuff. He's not gonna hand it out to your kids. He wants it all for himself. But we all want like a weirder version of reality, even if the reality is scary enough. And in most cases it is, but that's kind of the central driver of this book's plot, is that if people could just hone in on what the information they have, that would be one thing. But people want no matter how weird the truth turns out to be, they always want it to be something else. And that's, and it's like, you can't, this is the very first thing you said when we got on here, that it's so weird that this machine where we have total knowledge and total access to knowledge, you can't kill urban legends. They never go away. There's 9/11 conspiracy people to even now, 23 years later, like, well, that scientists determined that the fires didn't burn hot enough to. It's like, still you're doing that. Can the truth just not hold up? Is it like the equivalent of a weed that has grown resistant to weed killer, and we just don't know how to kill it, so it just spreads? Is that the situation we're in?
Yeah, yeah. It all comes back to that it doesn't matter how much access to truth and fact you have, there will always be people that they won't accept it, or they'll then kind of invent their own truth, their own version, and yeah, people kind of get caught up in it. But one thing that I actually thought when I saw the promotion would be a bigger part of the story, but just turned out to be a side quest, was the bunny, the white bunny. So, when did this come into the plot? When did you decide this was a little side quest that you were going to throw in?
Uh, this I will let readers decide what metaphor is there, because there is something, but it's just this guy getting out of his little cocoon and running into a situation that is in reality kind of low stakes and kind of doesn't matter. But it is an example of, you get the sense that he probably has encountered a lot of people in his life who needed help, and he could have helped them. And when he talks about his situation and how miserable he is, but he is also an able-bodied middle class guy. And you realize that you're kind of surrounded by people that need you. And I think a lot of people would be happier if they realized that. Um, because honestly, if you sit around all day kind of navel gazing, like, well, what's the point? What was I meant to do? Why was I put on this earth? And it's like, one, objectively, scientifically, you weren't put on this earth for any reason. But two, if you're looking for a purpose in your life, you're never more than a few houses away or a few apartments away from somebody who could easily use your help. The world is full of elderly and disabled people, or people who are just too sad to get out, who you could go get groceries for them, or you could run some errands, or you could give them a ride to the doctor. The world is full of people you pass every day who need you, and you would get tremendous satisfaction out of trying to help them, and it's help you can offer. And that your question of what was I put on earth for will go away very quickly. It could say, yeah, I was put on earth to help these people. I was put onto a planet full of people that need something, anything. They need a friend, they need somebody to complain to, they need something. And the moment you realize that, I think you are very far into solving your problem of like whatever existential crisis you have. And here you have a main character in this book who, it's clear, does not see any meaning in his life, and does not see a future for himself, and does not, kind of feels like he was born at the worst possible time. He's watching the world end. And I think the first step toward maybe realizing what's actually going on started with encountering somebody who simply needed something from him, something very simple, something he could help with, which is help trying to chase down this animal. So on the surface, it kind of seemed like something that just kind of distracted them on the way of doing this much more important thing. But I think in reality, it is a moment of, oh, you're in a world of proverbial lost bunny rabbits.
Yeah, and it's certainly a turning point in the transformation of, the main character, Abbott. But I mean, it's there's so much that you've packed into this that we haven't even began to cover. Because another thing that you jump into is swatting, and then the dangers of online targeting and online bullying, and then kind of reaction to that. And I wonder if swatting is a uniquely American phenomena, because obviously in like the UK and in Japan, like the police don't have so many guns, so you'd really have to have like an incredible situation for them to send the SWAT team round. But it seems like whenever I read about something once, I then see it turn up 10 times, and I think we probably spoke about that phenomena before. So you've got swatting in the book, and then I saw the horror author Brian Keene the other day talking about, when he was a victim to swatting. And
Mhm.
is this anything you've had any personal experience with, or kind of heard
No,
of
other
others?
than it just seems like the most extreme manifestation of this, like online culture and online, just this ecosystem, where if somehow there's listeners who don't know what swatting is, it's where you use you can use software that will send a 911 call, but will make it appear it's being sent from, like, you can spoof a fake phone number. So their 911 center will get a call that looks like it's coming from a particular house. And then they will say, oh my God, I'm in this house. My father has gone crazy. He's got a gun to his head. He says, if anybody even gets on the property, he's going to kill us all. In other words, they create a situation where the police would have to dispatch not an officer, but a SWAT team, guys in body armor, because they've got to come in hard and fast, armed to the teeth, and helmets, because armed man, he's dangerous. He's going to start shooting any moment. And it is a prank that has gotten multiple people killed because, again, if you show up and you startle somebody, if they do have a weapon in the house, or they show up at the door with something in their hand that looks like a weapon in the United States, there's a real good chance they're going to shoot that guy. So a person has gone to prison for that, or get like a swatting prank that resulted in somebody dying. It specifically does. I wouldn't be shocked if there's other countries where it has occurred, but it is something that does seem to play specifically into America's police culture, where because we're in a country where any home you show up at could have 37 guns inside of it, you just don't know. It's not like it's weird for an American household to have a gun in it. And where the police know if they're going to show up and there's somebody armed and they already, according to the call, they're already shooting, yeah, they're not going to pull up and knock on the door. They're going to show up, armed to the teeth, and they're going to come in loud and suddenly and do that thing that SWAT teams do. And the people who do this, uh, either they're sociopaths or they're just so disconnected from it that they see it all as just internet stuff, like a video game, like it's happening on the screen, so it's not real. And every once in a while it will become real because somebody will get shot, because usually the whole thing that happens is what they usually want to do is they'll do it to a streamer who's live and streaming when the team or SWAT team arrives. And it's like they come in and throw the guy to the ground and arrest him. Then they have to explain to the police, no, it was a hoax. I've been swatted. But every once in a while it goes horribly, horribly wrong. And again, it's one of those things that if somebody had made this up in an old like cyberpunk novel that you could use technology to imitate a fake emergency call to get a SWAT team dispensed to a house, this seems like something out of a Neil Stephenson novel or something like that, or out of Blade Runner. It's something that could only happen in this era, and I think in this culture, because again, if the police go to a home in Japan, they're pretty confident the guy who answers the door is not going to have a gun. Like, that's rare. Maybe he's Yakuza, maybe he's got, but for the most part in the United States, you have to assume they're armed. The same thing, you pull over a car, you have to assume they've got a gun in the glove box, because in the United States of America, it's not weird if they do. That's not a 1 in 1,000 thing. It's like a 1 out of 3 thing.
Yeah, I recall at the start of the story, talking about, if you go on a road trip, you take a gun with you. That is kind of the way that it is for most Americans, which makes me wonder, does that mean that you both personally take a gun with you when you go on road trips? Is this a essential item that must be
I do
packed?
not. I never have a gun in the car. Although, if you are listening to this and are thinking of carjacking me, maybe I do. Maybe I'm just saying that. You don't know. But I am a
There
gun
you go.
owner. I'm from a part of the country where it's not weird to see a gun. Because I have friends who like grew up in whatever LA, and they think it's weird that I have guns in the house. It's like, where I'm from, everybody had a gun in the house. This is in rural America near Appalachia, and yeah, everybody had guns, hunting guns, hunting rifles, pistols. It's just you got them for Christmas. It wasn't weird to have a gun. But no. But when I chat with people from other countries, they think that's the weirdest thing in the world. It's like, not weird here, not weird at all.
I mean, it's useful information for me to have. If I go to
Mhm.
America and I go on a road trip, when I go to the car rental, am I meant to go to the gun rental as well? And you know,
No,
I mean that.
I
Go
don't
on,
have
Bob.
a gun. Um, I guess because of my legal situation that's over, I'm still several years away from being able to actually get a gun. I think I've got in Texas, I have a 5 year that I have to wait. But I will say this, and I've never needed a gun, and I've had in my life 2 guns pointed at me, and don't let me get the gun away from you, because I do know how to do that.
Yeah, and by
Let's
the way,
just say I'll just leave it at that. The last guy who pulled a gun on me regretted that decision.
let me say, anyone listening out there, I'm being lighthearted about the gun situation. Uh, don't ever introduce a gun to a situation that doesn't have a gun in it. You're not going to improve. You're not going to improve things. If a confused drunk like bangs on your door, That's bad. You can call the cops or you can yell at the guy to go away. If you introduce a gun and you point it at him, like you decide you're going to be a badass, you're going to come to your door with a gun, and now you've startled a drunk guy, and now he's going to, maybe try to get that gun away from you, and maybe he will, and now he has a gun. There are very few situations that are improved. There are very few conflicts that are improved by introducing a gun to it. And I will spoil something in this story. The guns in this story do not make anything better when they show up.
No.
They do not. And if somebody broke into my house, it would have to be an extremely desperate situation for me to go get a firearm out of the closet. It would have to be truly like this person is crazy and possibly armed himself, because I think a lot of what people imagining happening in that situation is not what's going to happen. It is, if you're pointing a gun at somebody in the dark, and how sure are you that that you're pointing it at the right person? How sure are you that you can hit them before they can close the distance? In most cases, you simply have gifted that person a gun, because that person may be way better at fighting than you are. It's also possible that even if you shoot them, they may keep coming. That also happens. It is unpredictable. And if you talk to somebody in law enforcement, they'll tell you the same thing. If you've not had lots and lots of training of what to do in those situations, you are not going to be useful. This is the same thing that it's like, well, if you want to prevent school shootings, you need to arm the teachers. Okay, for every one school shooting, a badass teacher stops with a gun, you're going to have an 86-year-old English teacher at her desk, and you're going to have some troubled 17-year-old high school kid who's going to figure out how to get into that desk and get the gun out of it. I think that's going to happen about 50 times for every one mass shooting you stop by having armed teachers. We in America have this distinct idea that you can solve almost any problem by just arming people up even more than they were before. In my experience, that's not how it works. Usually, if it's not a gun situation, you making it a gun situation does not make things better. People get upset, they get angry, they get scared, and it escalates from there, as we have observed happening in many videos. You can go on your smartphone and watch right now of people being shot to death, if that's how you want to spend your evening.
Well, it is a hell of a note to close out the episode on. But, we're coming up to the time that we have together. What is it that you're working on now, apart from promoting this book? And what is it that's next for you? And in fact, you did mention working on the John dies at the end. So that's probably.
early early stages of that, because the manuscript's not due until the end of next year. It takes me 2 years to write a John dies at the end novel, and even that's not very much. They tend to have extremely complicated plots that loop in on themselves. They are unbelievably difficult to plan out, and they have several thousand jokes in them that I have to write. They're difficult. So that will be due at the end of next year. That book will be out in 2026. So there will be a break of a couple of years. I had been on a schedule for like 3 straight years of releasing a book a year. That has almost killed me. I'm not a young man anymore. I can't do that schedule anymore. So if you see me going back to a schedule of releasing a book a year, it means that I am in some financial desperation, and that somewhere I am very exhausted and unhappy. So the idea is that book will be out in 2026. No title for it yet. I barely even know how it ends. Then that will be the end of this book deal, and I presumably will, God willing, be offered another book deal. Otherwise, the Zoe Ash novels, those are in development as a TV series at Sony. I don't know if it's actually going to become a show. That's a multi-step process. It's full of nonsense, but they have bought the rights to that, and have a bunch of prominent showrunners attached. There's always somebody trying to pitch a John Dies at the End TV series or streaming series. Nobody has said yes yet, but somewhere out there, I guarantee you somebody's having a meeting, maybe as we speak, and maybe that'll become a thing someday. Otherwise, I just continue to write the books and make my little videos, and try to keep in touch with my readers and my fans, and This book is called, if you didn't hear say the title, I don't even know if we said it in this episode. The book is called I'm Starting to Worry About This Black Box of Doom. And by the time you hear this, it should be out everywhere in all formats, including audio. No, I don't read the audiobook. They hired a professional. I have to say that because people keep asking if I read the audio. No, they hired somebody to do that. Thank God. That would be awful.
Okay, and where can our listeners connect with you?
I am Jason K. Pargin, Pargin, all one word, pretty much everywhere. That's my username on TikTok, Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Facebook. Otherwise, you search my name, you'll get those social media pages. TikTok these days is where everybody follows me. If it goes away, we'll all have to find ourselves somewhere else. And it probably will. Even if they don't ban it, it will fade away and something new and even worse will come up in a few years, and then I will probably be on there unless I have a book somehow breaks out and sells millions of copies, and then I can become a recluse like I've always wanted to be.
All right. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners and viewers?
Just take care of yourselves. We've got an election coming up here in the United States. Just don't let the news. Your own mental health and your physical health is a precious resource, and every time somebody makes you upset, that takes a toll on your body. And you only have so much of that in you. And when someone has occupied your brain to make you worried or anxious or outraged or anything else, that has taken a little bit of a toll. They have asked you something of you. You have absolutely every right to close out of the app and walk away. They're not required to care about any of this stuff, any of it, because they don't care about you. So you have to, on top of, most of all, look after your mental health. If following this news and obsessing over what's going to happen next, if that is destroying your ability to function, turn it off. Turn it off. You can't. The world will keep right on spinning with you without you staring at it. It will. It won't end if you stop watching, and you have to give yourself permission to do that. It does not make you a bad person. Doesn't mean you don't care. It means that you have to take care of yourself first.